Thank you for joining us today. My name is Peter Heinrich. I am a developer evangelist with Amazon. And I have a distinguished panel of guests here today to talk about the future of esports. And I think the impetus for this panel was really Amazon's interest in the development of competitive gaming, particularly on mobile, but really as it applies to all sorts of platforms and devices. And so we wanted to get some insight from those industry professionals who are working with us every day, who have some intuition about where it might be headed and what they see as the primary trends and drivers for future success in that field. So I'd like to start just by introducing them briefly, and then I'll give them each a little bit of time to introduce themselves. And let me move this back just a little bit so that I guess I can't move back. Oh, well, I'll try to make Daniel visible to this side of the room. Anyway, so let's start with Daniel. Daniel Engelhardt is the VP of Interactive Ventures and Games at Lionsgate. Next to him, we have Pascal Clarice, who is the CMO currently at Eden Games. Next to him, we have Jesse Cherry from Inway. He's a product lead there. And finally, on the end, we have Nikita Sherman from Game Insight. He's the head of strategy. So maybe starting with you, Nikita, at the end, can you introduce yourself maybe a little more fully than I can and tell a little bit about your experience and why you're here?
Yep, sure. My name is Nikita Sherman. I'm a head of strategy of Game Insight company. Our biggest and one of the most successful titles is first-person shooter Guns of Boom. It has already 40 million installs and growing pretty fast. And we are working hard on making it a successful esports title now.
Yeah, I'm Jesse Cherry. I'm the senior product lead at Enway. We make Power Rangers Legacy Wars, which is a real-time 1v1 fighting game on mobile. In terms of esports, it was something that we kind of waited and saw if there was an interest there, and have been listening to the fans and sort of building in the platform as it goes.
Is this working?
It should.
All right. So I'm Pascal Clarice. I'm the CMO of Eden Games, which is a French development studio in Sunny Lyon, making racing games for the last 20 years on consoles and PC. And for the last 2 years, they've been making Gear Club on mobile, which is more and more going into competitive gaming, skills-based competitive gaming. And Eden Games actually has been acquired at 82% stake by Millennial Esports a few months ago, which makes us more powerful going forward to establish that esports vision, especially with Amazon now as a partner.
I'm Daniel Engelhardt. As you mentioned, I'm part of the games team at Lionsgate. I report to Peter Levin, who came in about 4 years ago to start our games division. We get to touch esports in a few different ways. We make games based off of our IP. One of them is Power Rangers Legacy Wars, which we're very proud of. And then we also are invested in an esports franchise called Immortals. They have a number of teams underneath the franchise, one of which is the LA Valiant competing in Overwatch League, which is why I'm wearing the vest.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. Before we go any further, I just want to make sure that everybody turns off their phone so that we don't get any distractions while we're actually recording. So you don't want to be the one who has to stand up in front of everybody on the video and turn your phone off. And also, you probably noticed you got scanned when you came in here. This is typical for every event at GDC. That actually lets you receive a survey in the mail after the event. So please take the time to respond to those surveys. It's really helpful for us to know exactly where we're hitting and where we're missing, and we can always use a constructive criticism. So with that, let's dive in. I want to start with just a little bit of history and get your take individually on why PC esports have grown and blossomed and mobile esports have just now started to come onto the radar. What inherently about mobile inhibited the development of esports compared to on the PC?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is the type of games that had initially sort of been on the mobile platforms. There is that emphasis on free-to-play in the mobile space, and for a long time, there wasn't a situation where you could nullify that free-to-play for tournaments. When it comes to PC games, you had much more of, purely skill-based games, and I think it's not until recently that has sort of started coming over into the mobile space. I think the type of games is a huge part because you can throw all the sort of aspects of esports and really shove it down people's throats, but if you don't have the game to back it up, then it's not going to happen.
I also think there's a lot of it's technical to Jesse's point. It's only recently that we've now been able to have real-time multiplayer battles on mobile to a degree that you would expect for esports. The level of fidelity that's possible with the mobile phone has gone up substantially, and the precision within controls that you have on mobile have gone up. So I think there's a long history, of course, of competitive gameplay within sports or within gaming, and that started on PC. And I think as mobile has gotten more and more powerful, you're just going to see it balloon past because the audience size is that much more massive, and the games are that much more accessible.
I'm with Daniel in that the technology curve of mobile, if you look back in 2008, which was just 10 years ago, what the phones were capable of was just simple casual game with asynchronous gameplay, if online at all. And then the ecosystem kept growing year by year at record speed, and it's only over the last 18 months, I would say, that the last pieces of the puzzle are coming together so that you can do live games. Let's not forget that esports, competitive gameplay, at the end of the day, like all sports, comes down to 1 millisecond. And any latency in the distribution is a problem. Obviously, we haven't reached 100% of game sessions not breaking right now on mobile, but we are getting closer to 95%. And then the playing field is fair, which is core to a sport.
Yeah, I think there is a combination of two main factors. The first is the constantly growing power of mobile phones, and the second is better and better internet connections in different regions. If you see, for example, if you look at Asia, in countries like India, there are much more number of mobile users than PC users, because they don't have just don't have money to buy a PC and use internet on PC. So that's what makes mobile, much less expensive thing to use and much more popular throughout the audience.
I guess it was kind of implied in the question that mobile is poised to explode into the esports realm. I really, looking back on it, I probably should have made that assumption. Do you feel like a lot of these changes are going to apply to PCs as well as mobile? Are they going to be catalysts for advances on the PC side as well as mobile? Or are these really just now allowing mobile to kind of shine, and there'll be some other new technology in the future that advances PC?
I think that PC esports, feels really nice nowadays, and they don't need too much catalysts. Actually, what makes it, really esports is when brands and money comes to the place, and PC esports already has it. It has attention of the audience, it has money, it has brands, and the interest from the brands is growing really fast. And companies like ESL, MLG, they do really great shows offline and, bring really, huge audience. And what is more interesting is how the mobile will grow, because there is no such a thing as a mobile esports now, I think, because we know the typical image of PC professional player, and we don't know how it looks like on mobile. We don't know, what is it? What the PC professional player has his, sexy T-shirt, some fancy furniture, energetic drink on his desk, and what is a mobile professional player. So that's the things that, we will have to see later.
It is a really interesting moment in time, though, for esports, even on the PC side, because to your point, as more brands and businesses come into this space. But if you look at what Blizzard is doing with Overwatch, for example, and building a traditional league structure around Overwatch is huge. Because it creates a business infrastructure where traditional sports investors like the Crafts are able to get involved and feel incentivized to help grow that league, which in turn helps get more brands involved into the mix. So I think on the PC side, you're going to continue to see a lot of growth. Obviously, the audience is there, but I think you're going to see a lot of business growth in terms of really being able to build true business models around everything that's happening within the ecosystem. And then on mobile, ultimately, I think that's just going to get replicated, right? Because the reason that Activision Blizzard felt comfortable going in and investing in the creation of a league is because there is an audience there that they know that they can tap into. And with mobile games, you have a huge audience. It's just a recent phenomenon that the games lend themselves to an esports-like setting where you could conceivably have leagues built around certain games in the mobile space.
And I think something important happened 2 weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago, which is that Fortnite is now coming to mobile and will allow crossplay with PC and console. This is a major industry achievement and a milestone. It's a turning point. It's the moment that proof exists out there that you can do games that are as advanced, as sophisticated on mobile as you can on PC. There will be minor details that change, maybe graphically and whatnot, but from a competitive gameplay point of view, Fortnite is setting up the benchmark for all of us, and it's a turning point. Clash Royale did a great job of grinding the situation and building the ecosystem for us, but now Fortnite is going to accelerate it, and 2018 is the pivotal moment for mobile esports, I believe.
I think a big part of that is even before esports, you need to be able to stream. And you look a lot at like SDKs and other aspects to try and get streaming into your phone, and it actually is pretty limited. Looking at like Twitch and other platforms, I think a big thing that Fortnite, because, we'll see what happens with, PUBG and Fortnite in terms of esports and where that goes, because you have to track 100 players, and that's its own sort of crazy situation, but you first have to be able to easily stream. And I think a lot of mobile players, like, it's way harder for them to stream off of their devices, even though, hey, you can get OBS, you can get other, devices on there that can help you do that. But I think until they can just be on their phone and you can have hundreds of thousands of users just throwing it right up onto Twitch right away without having to download a bunch of different apps, I think that's going to be a huge, huge turning point.
Yeah, great. Spectator mode is one of the hurdles as well.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, Jesse, which was the advance of skill-based games on mobile and how they were becoming ascendant, or they were becoming more available. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, and I think they nailed on it with the technology aspect of, as that technology, it's like, Enway, like even before I was with them, had put out competitive aspects, and we ran into lag situations and those aspects, and it wasn't until the next game that we built with pure multiplayer in mind that we built in, okay, there's going to be this much latency, or what's the max amount of latency we can build into sort of the gameplay that can actually make the competitive aspect fun still, because you're having to build for phone networks which are up and down. You're not Ethernet port right in. So I think in terms of competitive games, now that technology is there, people are going to invest in there. And I think Clash Royale was one of those big ones that sort of showed that, hey, here's a game perfectly made for the latency of mobile, because you place down your card and there's a certain amount of time that's going to take to appear.
So there's a lot of debate right now around whether you should build in esports from the ground up, or whether you create a great game first and then you wait for the market basically to tell you that you're a great esport. So it sounds to me like you're advocating for the former, which is plan for the esport. Is that what?
No, I would say the opposite. Oh. It's one of those things. So we actually worked with Amazon, and it was one of those things. We built the game. We're a medium, small size team. Got the game out, and it was an online, real-time competitive game. But we didn't have things like spectator mode and, ways for it to broadcast out. And so when we did this big tournament, Mobile Masters with Amazon, we thought about pulling out because in our game you have basically your own combat deck that acts as your moves. And when you're playing someone else, you don't see their combat deck. So when we were being streamed live on Twitch, you could only see one player's combat deck. And we were like, we don't have the dev time, we don't have the bandwidth to actually make a spectator view right away. And we were like, should we just pull out of this? And we didn't. And it turned out while some people, especially those that really knew the game, were like, oh, I wish I could see both UI, it was worth going into that situation. So for us, we built a competitive game which is needed for esports. You have to have that first. And then we saw that people were interested in playing our game at a competitive higher level. And now we've slowly started building tools for our players to use.
I see.
I think Nicholas had once told me that video game is an onion, meaning that you have the core and then you have the layering. The spectator mode, the tournaments, the pricing, that's just layering. You need to get the core of the onion right. And at the core of the onion, a competitive skill-based game like Street Fighter or Counter-Strike looks even completely different mathematically than a casual game about farming, for example. If you look at the math of a casual game about farming, you will see a lot of 10s, 100, or series like 8, 16, 32, 64. Somebody did that in a spreadsheet. If you look at Street Fighter, all the numbers looked completely fucked up, if you forgive my French, and it's like 7 milliseconds here, 13 milliseconds here, 18 there. Why? Because Capcom playtested the game until it felt right. And when it felt right, it felt fair. You don't win based on luck. Yeah, sometimes, like in football, you may hit the post instead of scoring the goal. There is that tiny element of luck, perceived luck, but never to the point like, oh, he scored that power up after 6 seconds and then the game changed and he won by pressing one button. That cannot happen in an esport, and that's why even Street Fighter planned, or even Pac-Man could be an esport. They were planned long before esports even existed. In fact, esports are built on those games and started organically getting built on those games, Street Fighter, Counter-Strike. But nowadays, if you want to plan an esport, you have to have the core gameplay feel skill-based, fair, and if you don't have that, you can organize as many tournaments as you want with $1 million prize pool. You're not an esport. You're a spectacle, but you're not an esport. An esport has to have that fairness built in, like football, basketball, or tennis.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that esports is about meeting the demands of the audience, not inventing it from the very early beginning. We've never thought about building an esports title while developing the game. Our main goal was to create, interesting, watchable, and playable game. Probably the best first-person shooter on mobile. And then after that, how our first tournament happened, our users came to us and asked us to organize tournaments, and we didn't have a platform for that, so they came to a third-party company and asked them to organize tournament for them. So that's how things works, and it's an organic kind of thing.
So there is no debate. Maybe, Daniel, you have a conflicting view then, because everybody else seems to think, no, you make a great game first, and then esports will come.
It's not just even great game. You could make a great farming game. I have nothing against that. But it doesn't have competitive gameplay at its core. And thus, it can be a huge success making billions of dollars. But it cannot become an esport.
And a big, oh, God, I forgot what I was going to say, so it's not that big. There we go. I got it back. Okay. A huge part is, look how much, even if, let's say, you're Overwatch, big esports, think of the hours that are spent on esports versus the hours of people playing. So you still need that, core gameplay, because esports is just going to be a small piece of everything. Yeah, it's great if you have, hundreds of thousands of people streaming and watching streams, but the game has to be there for everyone else to jump into first.
Yeah, I have nothing conflicting to say. Yeah, but I do think it's an interesting point in the context of this panel, which is that making a great game and the skill sets associated with making a great game are different than the skill sets associated with building a sport and building the in-game infrastructure and the real-world infrastructure that's required to have tournaments and have competitive gameplay and high viewership. So I think what's super valuable about what Amazon's doing with Game On is it's allowing the developers to focus on, hey, let's go make a great game. And if it has competitive elements, maybe there's potential for it to grow into an esport. But they don't have to worry about all the physical infrastructure that comes along with that because a lot of it is going to be provided by what you guys are doing. So,
thank you. We did not pay him for this. We didn't pay you for it, right? I'll write the check later. Sorry.
But you will, but you will.
Yeah. Okay. So does that mean that there's actually maybe a potential then for casual games to become, I mean, you mentioned Pac-Man earlier and
Tetris?
And Tetris is a great example. So
Chess, checkers.
I don't know if I'd consider chess a casual game,
No, but I mean, anyone can pick it up, yeah.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
The OG casual game. Yeah.
I mean, sure. I think that there is no limitations here. Casual game is a game, and it's. I mean, once it's have a competitive element, it could be an esports game, and we look at it from two different angles. The first one is some kind of big esports, like with the big shows, with like ESL. Gathering stadiums of spectators and doing great matches. But the second one is the esports for everyone, for all of us, for everybody sitting here in this audience. And these kind of games could be possible only with mobile, because on PC it's you have to have fair amount of time to play PC titles. You cannot just spend 5 minutes playing Counter-Strike or Dota. And with mobile, you could play any kind of game, match 3 games, Tetris, Pac-Man or something. And once you have infrastructure platform to organize tournaments, it could be esports.
If you think about soccer, you can play soccer casually with your friends at the park age 5 and just kick the ball. Or you can become a professional by training for 20 years and go to the World Cup. And I think that's what the best esport is. It's easy to pick up, and it might even look casual at first play. But it's hard to master, and if you play it for 20 years, you will see the difference. And being a champion is about training and skills and talent. But it can be easy to pick up. There is no problem with that. I would even say, there's an anecdote I keep saying when I hear too much the casual core, as if it was two different people. Space Invaders came out in 1977 in Japan. It was the first game ever in Japan, so obviously everybody was a non-gamer, and you could say that your first time playing Space Invaders is pretty casual. But by the end of the year 77, there was a coin shortage in Japan because people were playing it so much. I'm guessing a few Japanese people became hardcore players of Space Invaders for that to happen. And that is, I think, the ideal set of a game or an esports. It starts casual, and we have something for you to start. The barrier of entry is not too high. The graphics of football are not great. It's just the ball, kick it. But then you can grow into that. The world keeps growing for you if you want to grow into it.
At this point, I'd like to mention that we do have a microphone down here in the middle of the middle passage here. And so if you have a question for any of our panelists, please take a moment to jump up, make your way to the mic, and we'll try to work some questions into the discussion, as well as we'll have some Q&A at the end. But I just want to make sure everybody's, we have somebody already. Okay, I waited too long. Go ahead.
I just had one question regarding, you brought up Fortnite coming to mobile. How do you guys feel about the perceived skill gap between PC players and non-PC players? For example, like there have been some cross-platform games where there have been like a big there's been a big gap in the skill level between PC players and non-PC players. How do you think that affects the esports side of the game?
We are gonna have to wait and see, but I hear where you're coming from, because obviously if I play with keyboard and mouse and you're with a controller, you don't stand a chance on PC. So there is there is that aspect, and we're gonna have to wait and see. Not working for Epic, I don't want to speculate too much.
I mean, well, what I would say to that is just like, it makes it so there's more players that understand what Fortnite is, even if they end up sort of siloing off, let's say, not into games with PC players. You know, majority of people will never be a professional at something, but they get to participate and be part of that. Now they've played Fortnite, they know what it is, now they might just want to watch it instead of play it. That opens that up for them.
Yeah, and it comes back to my example of soccer. I will never play the World Cup. I'm 40, it's too late, but I still play every week with my friends. I'm lame. Cristiano Ronaldo probably will think, what the fuck is he doing? But I'm still doing it.
Any other comments? Next question.
Hey, I guess this is primarily for you, Nikita, but anyone else. If you had to pick one good, solid business argument as a mobile developer for investing in esport, I mean, you've got, raise retention, you've got possibly lower marketing and acquisition and CPI. What would that be from your view?
For us, for example, esports, the first place is a tool for growing retention and to help us building evergreen titles, not a tool for user acquisition. But it will come later if esports part of the game will, become successful. So everything will come.
Yeah, actually, I've just recently tackled this situation. So we just put out an update last week that sort of updated with a spectator view and also a draft mode where you can ban and pick characters. And we put it into a mode that doesn't have we're a free-to-play game, so no monetization tied in. And the reason we did that was we wanted to sort of dabble with giving tools to the players. And for us, it was a mixture of both retention and marketing, and not retention from something that you could easily show a board of investors a slide and see this like retention number skyrocket up. But if I can keep my most like rabid and avid players sort of thinking that the game is alive and well, giving them the tools to create their own tournaments, which means is creating their own content, you just keep those sort of top end players just there for a little bit longer. It's worth it. Yeah.
So I'm a marketing guy, and I've been doing marketing for 20 years, which means I look at it as, basically my job is simple. I find a hit, and which was made by other people. I can't make hits. Then when I have that hit, I launch it and look for momentum. When I have the momentum, if we won, then the tough job begins, which is to keep that momentum. Keep the window of opportunity as wide open as you can for as long as you can and ride the wave. What does that best? Building a brand out of the hit. And there are many ways to build brands. You can look at Angry Birds going the Hollywood way, merchandise, animation. For certain games, that way is maybe not the best, but esports might be a way to do it. If marketing becomes a spectacle in and of itself, then you've hit the jackpot, and you might have a chance to be Beyonce or Madonna rather than one-hit wonder Robin Thicke. So it's about longevity.
Throwing shade on Robin.
People remember that.
I think another thing to keep in mind too is that competing or creating a major esport to the scale of a League of Legends or an Overwatch is probably one of the hardest things to do ever, because not only do you have to make a really awesome game that rises above the noise, but you have to then create an entire infrastructure around it, which is, as I was saying before, an entirely different skill set that leagues in traditional sports have built up over decades. However, having competitive gameplay within a game and building a competitive sort of community and ecosystem around your game, to all these guys' points, improves engagement and gives players a reason to keep coming back and learning more and trying to compete with their friends. So it doesn't necessarily have to get to the huge level of, hey, we're going to have tournaments all over the world at a massive scale, but by leveraging the competitive aspects of your game and tapping into that, it can keep people around longer and hopefully have them paying as well.
Yeah, and if you can't build a brand, at least you want to build a community. And so to the local tournament point, there's nothing better than to meet at the pub or at some locations, especially if the developer shows up. Because even in the social media age, I think that hasn't changed, that there is this disconnect where players see the developers as kind of robots, and whatever occasion you have to show that you're actually humans, that bond goes much bigger. So obviously you can communicate and stream, but meeting, having tournaments, making it real, making the digital world go real, always will help with building a community.
Thank you. These are much more compelling than my original, it would be really cool thesis to the board. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Jerry. I'm the teacher from Taiwan. I got two questions. The first one is, what kind of mobile game are beneficial for the broadcasting? For example, some AR game, you can use different angle to broadcast that game. Maybe what kind of games is suitable for broadcasting? The second question is, what's different between you want to build up the esports community on the traditional esports and the esports community on the mobile?
So to the first question,
in terms of the broadcasting,
I think when it's about a spectacle and people watching, you cannot be boring. Repetitive is boring. So why do we watch soccer 100 years in? Because every match is different, every goal is different, the emotions are going to be different every time. And so this goes back to the sandbox in the beginning, the core of the onion. The competitive gameplay has to be such that watching a Street Fighter games of two champions is exciting because you're not really sure what you're going to see. Although you know all the moves, you know all the skills, you've trained them. And I think that surprise and delight is what you want to do in entertainment, in any form of entertainment, surprise and delight. So if your gameplay can do that automatically, you kind of hit the jackpot.
how about the second question?
Second question? Can you repeat the second question, please?
What's different between the traditional esports community and the community on the mobile?
I don't see any differences between communities because community is the same thing anywhere. And you should work, it's all about people and their interests. So you should build this interest independently on the title. Is it PC title or mobile? And adding to the first question and the answer, I think that any kind of spectators mode is about telling a story to the users. And this story should be unpredictable and interesting to watch. And while creating this spectator mode, you should think about how you... It's not only about showing the process of gameplay of something which is happening on the screen, but also about selling your game to the watchers. So you should think how they will perceive the image on the screen, how they will perceive the game. So this is the very important part of building the spectators.
In terms of the second question, yeah, I would say the only difference is they can play at any time. I mean, it really is. Like, we have people yelling at us about tier lists, about balance changes, just like any other game, and they're just as, passionate about that, for sure.
Yeah. The platform on which they play is the difference.
Yeah, but ultimately, a sport is a sport, right? So if you build a community that's passionate about your game, there may be different demographics depending on what game it is. But to your point earlier, if you're forming a community and there's an affinity to certain teams or certain aspects of the game, that can happen on either platform. It's more about the community building.
And that's something that really interests me, actually, the convergence between video games just in general and these more mainstream pastimes that people are getting excited about, like mainstream sports. And I'm just wondering, is there a shift in the business as well? I mean, is there some kind of convergence in the business models of games and professional sports?
I mean, it's kind of, I was mentioning that earlier. I think it's a super interesting moment in time for esports, particularly if you look at, what Activision Blizzard's doing with Overwatch. I mean, they've built a league structure that is absolutely comparable to the NFL. There's franchises in LA, there's a franchise in San Francisco, in London, in Seoul. And right now, all those teams are competing at the Blizzard Arena in LA, but eventually they will have local arenas, and they're building fan bases within their home, their sort of home districts. And because the owners of each team are invested in the franchise, just like you would expect, an owner to be invested into a football franchise in the NFL, all of the owners are mutually incentivized to grow the league as a whole. And so when Blizzard does a deal with Twitch, that's to the benefit of everyone, all the owners. And so you're starting to get traditional sports investors into the mix. You're starting to get traditional brands into the mix. And so the business structure absolutely looks like what you would expect from traditional sports. And that hadn't really happened until this year. I mean, it's the inaugural season of Overwatch League. And the audience size that we're seeing is amazing, and the engagement that we're seeing is amazing. So it's only going to go up from here in terms of what that business model ends up sort of impacting from a monetary point of view. But it absolutely looks exactly like traditional sports in terms of the overall structure of it.
Yeah, and obviously you can innovate about a lot of things, but then there is the economy, and we usually try to look at what has been done before in economics. So obviously you're going to look at what sports and its hundreds of years of building businesses more mature. You're going to look at it like the same as in video games. We've looked a lot at Hollywood in the past. But I'm very much looking forward to the moment in the next couple of years where maybe traditional sports will start getting inspired by new models and innovations that might come from games. Because we've seen that shift between Hollywood and gaming over the last 10 years.
My next question is it because games are moving more towards sports because sports have been successful, or is it because they're applying their own lessons to a whole new medium and coming to the same conclusion that sports came to with their medium?
It's before you challenge a convention, you have to draw before you can care how to win. So if some things are part of the foundations of what you need to have, and you can learn from your role models and from the past, there is no shame in that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But then once we have the four wheels, of course we can drive the car a little bit differently, and I'm sure innovation will come from the space and will eventually inspire sports in the same way that games have started inspiring Hollywood over the last 15 years. Mm-hmm. That relationship has completely shifted compared to when I was young, and we were just the lesser products, the license, right.
How long until everyone in that's terrible, in sort of just football is known by a nickname? It's something that I feel like the older audience, with the way people in esports are known by their handles, like I hear less and less of it's not going to be seen as serious until they lose that and have their proper names. But it seems to be going away because the younger audience is growing up with that. So I wonder when sports, like football and basketball, just everyone's going to have a nickname.
Snuffly Bacon. Nice work. The three-pointer.
Yeah, Shaq. Yeah, right there.
Thank you for your answer.
Next question.
So working part-time as an esports journalist, the idea of hundreds of potentially esports mobile games is both exciting and daunting. So I was wondering if you had any projections for the mobile esports industry into the future, any metrics, and if you think it's going to be that more casual, supplemental thing, or like brands like Immortals potentially get involved in mobile esports.
Well, I think, again, as I was saying before, to have a major esport on the scale of an Overwatch or League of Legends is just, again, probably one of the hardest things to do in media. So that's going to remain to be the case even as mobile games come into the fold, right? It's very hard to build that infrastructure and to build up an audience of that scale. However, there is a lot of value in tapping into competitive communities and building sort of competition around your game on potentially a smaller scale. So I think you're going to see a lot of that starting to happen, particularly with tool sets like Game On being available. As far as the larger sort of esports franchises getting into mobile, that's absolutely happening. We actually, Immortals just announced that we're starting a mobile division, and we're putting together a roster around Arena of Valor. And so it's a huge area of focus for us because we realize that the mobile audience is huge. The games that are available on mobile are extremely compelling and fun to play and can be competitive just as much as PC games. So I think you will start to see a similar infrastructure form around mobile games for the sort of top tier titles. But they'll have their own kind of look and feel, obviously, depending on what the game is.
I mean, with trying to decide what you're going to write about, I mean, you have to look at, all right, how many people on Twitch, YouTube, and these other channels are watching these games? What is the, sort of, let's just say, like, is there a popular forum? How's the Reddit threads? What's the chatter? Because you could have a game, let's say, Candy Crush, let's say there's tournaments and competitive nature in there, and you have millions and millions of players, but that doesn't mean there's an audience that wants to read about sort of the in-depth aspect of those things. I think there's a reason stuff like Street Fighter, League of Legends, like those have those rabid, hardcore, sort of very invested players, and those are the ones that are going to read about that stuff. And I think you just have to look at the audience and how they're consuming the game. If most of the consumption, I think, comes from within the game, I don't know how much a pull you're going to get with writing articles about it.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is more about monetization. I was wondering if you had any insights that you could share about monetization in the esports environment that doesn't drift into pay to win, but is separate from the typical customization aspect.
So obviously advertising, native advertising, integrated advertising, if you look at sports again, you have named arenas, you have the jerseys, so sponsoring not just the events, but also sponsoring in the game and integrating that in a clever way, in a smart way, is super important in esports because it's money that doesn't change the end of the game, the end game. So you also have to look into all these things that are cosmetics, personality, and bragging rights. For example, if you are in the first 100 of that tournament, you can buy that hat for that day, and you're the only 100 who can do it. And maybe you can even 3D print a version of that hat. So tailoring the economy more and more, it's like Jack Ma from Alibaba says, we are beyond the B2C era, we are in the C2B era. So it's consumer to business. The consumer tells us what he wants, the tailor he wants, and we sell it to them. And I think those bragging rights, personality, and cosmetics are going to help in games that need essentially to be meritocracy. Because as you said, pay to win is going to break the model.
Yeah, and I think, that you could just use that advice for any competitive game, whether you have esports or not. If you're gonna, I would, it's really interesting because it's not something that our game currently right now has, but looking into what can you get consumers to sort of, people that are watching the game or play the game but aren't in the competition to pay for, and sort of trying to figure out ways for them to sort of invest in a team and sort of, put money into voting and different statistics. I think the Dota 2 Compendium, which, we'll see what happens this year, they might not be even having that. They just released a sort of new system with that. But I thought that was one of those things, beyond, of course, you had all the cosmetics, but like getting cards for players, all these aspects, it made you more invested in the actual tournament coming up, and you were trying to spend money on the tournament rather than in the game. But this is just sort of throwing ideas out, not something that we've put in and monetized in our game.
And I think we talked earlier about the missing parts of the ecosystem. To my point earlier about native advertising, I think that's one of the last missing pieces where the market has to catch up. Meaning that, yes, Red Bull is into esports, Mercedes-Benz is into esports, and it's great, but they all do it in direct, and they have to find with which game they go. I don't know any sports agency out there that sells NBA placements, NFL placements, and British Premier League placement will also sell placements in games. They haven't realized yet that they can be the same provider for both. And for us, developers and publishers, that would simplify the early relationship, because you can have endemic brands that you could place and integrate inside your games if you knew them. But maybe your business developer guy doesn't have the phone number of Geico if you're a car game or something like that. So if you can just go to an agency and tell them, hey, do the same thing you do with NBA, keep 15 or 20% of the money you get me, and you sell all my advertising, but integrate placements, not the mobile video ads that that we run nowadays. So really taking care of who's every night going in the game and all these things. This isn't streamlined at all right now. And in the sports industry, it is. It really is. It's very easy to sponsor a team. And it's expensive, but it's super easy. You take the call, and tomorrow you're going to be sponsoring a team in Premier League. No problem at all.
Yeah, there's a couple SDKs, I can't remember the names of the company, that try and integrate that stuff. But then again, you're having to change your app to do this. It's you're having to take dev time, you're having to put out an update, you're having to have your users forced to download that update. But there are companies trying to solve that. I mean, I guess plug Amazon some more. With their real world prizes, you can now integrate using one of their APIs, real world prizes, and hey, you can be like, hey, let's say we're Power Rangers, hey Hasbro, we're going to, put all these toys for these prizes, advertise your new toy, and get sponsorship that way.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Gear Club is also a launch partner of Amazon Game On, and this is a great way to offer real rewards in game, and some of them may be Amazon Alexa. But if you are in partnerships with other manufacturers of products, well, guess what? Most of them are available at Amazon anyway. So shipping it, and that's what I meant earlier with, it's about speed, right? Speed to market. So everything could be done if we had years and years of time, but when you have plugins and APIs that just gets it done in 2 weeks, and then they take care of the logistics and the overheads, rather than us trying to build it for months, that's when suddenly the vision is quick enough to execute.
Thank you very much.
We have an open mic. Please come up and ask your questions. In the meantime, I want to talk a little bit more about the teams and the affiliations. And you mentioned how easy it is to sponsor a real-life sports team. How do you attract investors to this new approach, or this new reality of video game support?
Well, I can tell you as Lionsgate being an investor in Immortals, what attracted us to Immortals was a couple of things. One, the audience that's consuming esports is a very elusive demographic and a tough demographic to reach. And it's hard to reach them in the traditional ways that media companies would release them. A lot of them don't have cable subscriptions, for example, right? So for us, in making that investment, we thought, okay, well, here's a way for us to be directly associated with the team, have a genuine connection to that team, and find ways to potentially bring interesting content to their fans. For example, we actually just did a sponsorship where we had Ash vs. Evil Dead on the jersey of our Overwatch team, LA Valiant. And we didn't do that in a manipulative sort of way. It was a genuine, we thought that the Overwatch audience would respond quite well to that franchise. And we had the cast come out to a game, and we're going to be doing screenings for fans at Lionsgate.
How come the cast is not here today, right now, for me?
We were working on that for you.
Oh, okay.
We failed, sorry. But then in addition to that, we also felt like as a pure media company and a pure content company, there's an opportunity to create premium content around esports. In particular, in this moment in time, there hasn't been a lot of premium content produced around esports. So that was also an opportunity for us. I think as we're talking to other sort of traditional brands and investors, it's partly that strategic conversation of, okay, well, we as Lionsgate felt like it made sense for these following reasons. But I think a big part of how the ecosystem can now attract more traditional investors is because it's becoming more structured, because there is a real structure around it. And if you look at what a lot of the publishers are doing around esports, you're tapping into an ecosystem that's real and exists, and that makes it easier to wrap around people's heads.
So as a small, now we are owned by Millennial Esports, so that will accelerate the growth of Eden Games into esports. But before that, we were an indie. And the way we worked with Pagani, Chevrolet, all these brands were to try and change the licensing relationship, which is that both parties actually look at the money. I want your money, or you want my money. And we try to establish the partnership by emphasizing what we can do for them, which most of the time they're not aware. That we can put their factory and replicate their factory within 3 weeks and put it into the game. They didn't think that was possible. That excites them. So we throw the Christmas list that excites them, and then only after that we talk about what we want. And we are ready to barter. So it's not just money. If you have this amount of millions of subscribers on Facebook or followers on Facebook or YouTube, this has value to me. We can trade that. And if you can take me to Geneva Motor Show, well, I couldn't afford it on my own. This has value to me. So I'm willing to discount and discount and discount, because ultimately I want that my first campaign with Pagani is so great that the other car manufacturers want to be next. So show him what your media can do, show him what your medium can do, and seduce them, and then ask for the money later. It's the drug dealer trick, right? The first one is always free. And after you're hooked, we'll talk money.
So we're running low on time. I just want to make sure that if anybody else has any questions that they want to slip in under the wire, you should probably get in line quickly. First, you're up.
Yep. I wanted to just talk about metagames, because one of the things that strikes me about esports is the strong and deep metagames are what keeps them there and gets people engaged. So from a developer perspective, what do you think it is to make a good metagame? And from a consumer perspective, what is it that's the most engaging thing about metagames?
I'm going to ask you guys to limit your answers to just a few minutes so that we can get some last questions in.
I didn't hear it, so go ahead.
Yeah, he's asking about metagames, so we're a fighting game, so we deal with that a lot. And we always balance that with coming out a new character, and I'm sure, games like League and Dota do too, of you want to make it strong enough so the players want to use it, but it doesn't break things. Metagames, we've learned, we put out what we call 2.0 update, and they were more interested in the balance changes than they were in any of the new features, anything at all. And that actually opened our eyes a lot. With going forward, it's going to be really important that we try and shift things. I think it's hard. I think you take the riskier, with us, we have a roster of like 50 characters. So it's taking the characters that aren't used much and trying to really mix them up while bringing the characters that have too high of a win rate slightly down, but not changing the way they play. You want to take a little bit out, but without completely breaking the fun. There's a quick answer, I guess.
Okay, maybe we'll move on to the next question.
So the question is, what do you think is the biggest difference between doing mobile esports and doing PC esports? Because with all the difference you just mentioned, like shorter games and easier to pick up and maybe require less skill, so that players might even consider there's nothing much to watch. With all that difference, what do you think it might, do we have a different approach to mobile esports, or we just copy and paste what we did for PC esports? So that's my question. What's the biggest difference from your perspective?
Are you asking about the approach from the point of view of the developer, or?
Yeah, it can be from a developer or a game organizer or anything. It's just in general, what do you think it would be the biggest difference? It's a really broad question, but I felt like the whole question is leaning towards like the mobile esports is rising, and it's just what we have seen with PC esports, but I'm not sure if that's the case. So you can just name any difference you seem like.
Okay, so what I think is that PC sports put some kind of, a bar of the quality of the games, and this bar is pretty much high now. And comparing to mobile, from the point of view of the developer of mobile games, nobody knows how the mobile esports game should look like. And so this gives you much, more flexibility than creating a PC title. And on the other hand, it gives you also, what is a development? Development is, making experiments and mistakes. And you make mistakes every time. I mean, every month, every week, every day, you make new mistakes. And the flexibility of development on mobile is much more dynamic, and which makes you much more flexible in making these mistakes. You can make mistake today and, solve it tomorrow. So, and that what makes you, it's cheaper, much cheaper and much faster to create a mobile game, esports, not esports game, than a PC title. And,
I would add that, hold on. Yeah, no, I lost my train of thought.
Well, on that, I'm gonna pause for a moment just because we're pretty much out of time. But I think if it's okay with you guys, I'm gonna commit you to hanging out for just a few minutes, maybe afterwards, if people want to come up and ask questions directly, just for a few minutes after the talk. Because I do want to mention the fact that there is a survey that Amazon has put up. We'd like you to participate. Please, again, let us know how we're doing. You're going to get a survey from GDC as well. Ours is really the one you want to fill out first. And also, I want to highlight the fact that if you didn't get one of these cards on your way in, then you should definitely get one on the way out. They're a little punch card. You go to 3 of our events today. This counts as one. And you can take it and redeem it at the AWS booth on the expo floor for a $20 gift card. So please make sure you grab one of these on the way out. And with that, I'd really like to thank our panelists. I want to extend my my gratitude for you guys coming out and participating tonight. Thank you so much for coming.